And now we're joined by our guest, Jagannath Panda, head of Stockholm Center for South Asian and Indo-Pacific Affairs, as well as the professor at the University of Warsaw. Thank you so much for joining us here in the studio.
Thank you very much.
Now, just before we go into this, because we have right now, and I believe our viewers are seeing this, we have Xi Jinping landing in Budapest as we speak, that last leg of his trip. Let's just also step back for a moment. So far, looking at this whole visit, he was in Paris, he was in Belgrade, now in Budapest. Who's the winner out of this? Is it Xi Jinping, is it China, or is it Europe?
I think definitely China, because they were searching for an opportunity. And it's a breakthrough visit of Xi Jinping. It's been a gap of 5 years after that he's visiting, and there has been a gap between China and the West, China and the European world. And I think this is a very necessary breakthrough for Xi Jinping to come to Europe and particularly to visit the comfort zone. France, Serbia, Hungary, these are the comfort zones in European circuit for Chinese leadership. So he cannot have a better venue to restart his Chinese diplomacy, the campaigning he's talking about, the shared futures with the European world. I don't think there is a better opportunity. So definitely, it's a big win for Xi Jinping because he was searching and waiting for an opportunity like this.
So you mentioned a win, and obviously there is a tension in between Europe and China. What does this win actually signal to the European Union? And what do you think should be the next steps when it comes to this very delicate relationship?
I think in many sense it's a repetition of the old Chinese diplomacy in a new format. If we try to understand the pre-pandemic world, China always pursued this divide and rule kind of a approach in its foreign policy towards European Union countries, member states. And there are not only European member states, but also there are a range of countries who are outside the European Union. They are also essentially belongs to the comfort zones for China. So all this while, before the pre-pandemic world, China has pursued a divide and rule approach to reach to the European world. But today, what we are seeing is that probably China is not necessarily giving that impression that it is again trying to repeat the same kind of policy. But gradually, the Chinese intention right now to rebuild the confidence in the European world that it has been lost, not only due to the pandemic, but also because of the Ukraine war. The way the Chinese leadership, the way China has actually extended support to Russia on the Ukraine war, and a range of other issues, conflicting issues across the world, including on the Hamas crisis, not to the Israel's, but also to the Hamas groups. That has raised a lot of questions about the Chinese identities and the Chinese superiority in world politics to provide that leadership, to provide the peace and stability, to provide that required leadership of taking the world politics forward. And I think to that extent, I think this visit of Xi Jinping is trying to regain the confidence in the European world, and they are trying to rebuild the relationship because the political relationship between Europe and China has seen a massive slowdown, not only during the pandemic, but also in the last couple of years, particularly because of the Russia-Ukraine war.
But indeed, I mean, obviously, as we're seeing those pictures now of Xi Jinping landing in Budapest, a great fanfare as he was received also throughout his journey also in Serbia. And I think there's a tweet really briefly that we can just show now from Politico. This is, I believe, just from today, where I think it's very much on the highest level. Serbia to Xi Jinping, no one reveres you like we do. Now, of course, these are small countries. I mean, Serbia not even in the European Union, so not very effective in terms of affecting this giant bloc. Hungary, on the other hand, is, but nevertheless, I mean, how realistic? I mean, Europe was better prepared this time around. The last trip, there was a different policy of the European Union collectively. It seems the sort of pieces are on the table here. So if we're looking at the fanfare that Xi Jinping is receiving now, I mean, let's say, how really impactful can he sway Orban? Can he sway Vučić? I mean, what more can really Orban do at this point to stand in the way of European policy?
You actually said everything. You said these are small countries. These are small countries, but with big tickets for China. If we see Xi Jinping's visit to Serbia, he signed 29 agreements. And those 29 agreements are comprehensive in nature. They cover trade and economy, political interactions, socio-economic interactions, most importantly, educational interactions, which has been one of the prime gateway for China to come to the European world. So I think these are the small countries, but provide a big ticket entry to the European world in many sense. And also, particularly if we take the case of Serbia and Hungary, they have been pro-Russia. They have been pro-Russia, and they have also been quite overtly extended their disagreement to rest of the European member countries, European Union member countries, to say that China is a big actor and China should be welcome to the European world. And I think through this visiting these small countries, Xi Jinping has, sounded a grand message to the European world that Europe needs China as much as China needs Europe. And I think in many sense, this visit is a revamping of, a strategy of revamping the political ties between China and Europe. And I think this is going to continue further. And we'll see probably in a limited interval, Xi Jinping again coming to some of the other European countries, which matters to the Chinese world and also to the world politics in general.
I guess the big question of today, as Xi Jinping is landing in Budapest this very moment, is what is going to come out of this meeting, especially that Hungary is part of the European Union. And as you mentioned, there's been a number of deals signed in Serbia, and we are looking at around 16 deals that could possibly be signed with Hungary. And according to Chinese estimates, the Chinese enterprises in Hungary could reach up to 30 billion euros by the end of this year. So we're talking about a very large portion of money. Obviously, the EU is looking closely, but do you think that EU has what it takes in order to be able to sort of sway Hungary closer towards itself and further away from China?
I think this is the Chinese strategy, classical Chinese strategy. They still believe that they could create a divisions within European Union member countries, and they could possibly sway big way the Eastern European and Central European countries. The Chinese have not definitely given up on their original framework of 17+1 or 16+1, even though we know that a number of countries have withdrawn from that framework, and that framework currently probably not moving ahead the way the Chinese would have anticipated. But we know for a fact that the Chinese are very good in terms of renewing the history, the logics behind the history, and in their original framework. This is how they have been operating to bring out many civilizational dialogues and many historical dialogues in their foreign policy. So I would not be surprised that the Chinese would like to revive their reach towards the Eastern European and Central European countries by reaching very heavily with Hungary and of course with Serbia and many other countries in the Eastern European. And this is how they create the division. And also the Chinese also take in a strong note of the fact that probably even though there is a political unity is currently reflected among the European Union member states on a lot of security-centric issues, particularly on Russia-Ukraine war, on the issues like NATO. But still the Chinese believe that European Union is still not strongly united when it comes to security issues or security mandate. So therefore, they still believe they can create that fixture and they could still stay, dividing the European Union countries in order to restrict them to build that necessary, necessary consensus that is required against China.
But on the face and on the facts, there's no way that Hungary can block any of these trade agreements. This is a collective European decision. I mean, Xi Jinping would have to go to many more countries to try, as you said earlier, divide and make that whole political change. Let's also talk money, because I think that's important here as well. We know very much that if we're looking at the EV market, for instance, I mean, Europe is incredibly important for China. I think it's over 40%. It's one of the biggest markets. That's still open, right? Even the Americans have closed it a bit more. Tariffs from Turkey as well. So the Chinese need Europe on this, and the Europeans have now pushed as well several investigations and probes. Do you think this is kind of now going to buckle? Are the Europeans going to push this further, or are we going to go back? Is this leverage? How is it going to play out?
I think we'll see flexibility on both sides, from Chinese side as well as from the European Union side. If we recollect Xi Jinping's visit with President Macron in France and also with the European Union leaders, it all discussed about de-risking and how China could be a much more flexible actor in terms of importing the goods from European Union. But there has been a complaint that the European Union is not really having that necessary market access within China, and probably end up being in the losing side. And I think the message here is try to accommodate each other's interest, and therefore I think through this period Xi Jinping would definitely try to appear much more flexible, even though we know for a fact that the trade and economic issues are much more sensitive when it comes to the European Union, because it has to take into consideration each of the member states' countries' interest, economic interest. But still, I think there is a much more flexibility reflected on both sides, which is a positive development. And this is where the Xi Jinping's visit is going to do the trick, both for China and also for China-EU relations.
So you mentioned this flexibility, and I would like to take a slightly deeper dive into the very concept of that flexibility on both sides. Obviously, both sides would like to have the cake and eat it. We know that there is a flooding from the Chinese market when it comes to goods here in the European Union. On the other hand, we know that there is massive support from China when it comes to Russia and the war in Ukraine. So the question is now, how do they balance these things out in order to be able to have that cake and still eat it?
I think we have to see what exactly European Union is expecting from China at this moment, and where Xi Jinping would really appear flexible. And I think there are critical issues like critical raw materials is one of those areas where the Chinese would be very flexible. We know for a fact that when it comes to green technologies, batteries, when it comes to energy, solar energy, these are the areas where the Chinese could make a big concession to the European Union and have a much more reciprocal partnership. And this is where I think we are going to see a lot of positive interactions between European Union and China. But I would not really draw absolute optimism at this moment. This is just a first interactions after 5 years, and I think a lot has to be done. And I think this visit has prepared a necessary political context in order to move forward for a more better interaction.
It does feel like it's testing the waters for China.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, but also at one point as well, I mean, in Paris, and this was sort of a promise that, at least it was a public promise here, that Xi Jinping said that he will not sell or support Russia in terms of also a lot of these dual-use technologies, military aid, anything like this. Now, that's what he said. Now, how realistic do you think that promise is going to be?
Of course, we know that there is a lot of close chemistry has evolved between China and Russia. So we cannot really rely on China. And we know for a fact that if the world today believes, particularly if the West particularly believes that Russia is an enemy or a threat from the past, China is a threat for the future. So there is a strategic realization, and there is a caution attached to that. But we know for a fact that China is also an advanced technological hub, advanced technological power. Its competition is mostly with the United States of America. And the Chinese have made tremendous progress in a range of areas, from artificial intelligence to genome to codings to space technologies to a lot of green technological areas. And these are the areas where a much more collaborative effort from the European Union will be only beneficial for the European member state countries, European Union member state countries. So therefore, I think there will be much more accommodation when it comes to the technological exchanges and negotiations are concerned. But still, European member countries, mostly, they would be really hesitant to go all the way to collaborate in all the critical areas when it comes to critical technologies, because China is not really a trusted power. It's a divisive power when it comes to critical technologies, and when it comes to its military track record. As you pointed out, it has double-used technologies, and therefore there will be an amount of cynicism attached to talking to the Chinese on critical technologies.
We still don't know if it's going to be strategic partner or rival. That's still, I think the jury is out on that one still. Really interesting. Yeah.
Last but not least, you mentioned that obviously China backs Russia, and this close relationship could potentially be what drives Russia to be more bold when it comes to dealing with Ukraine as of now. Do you think there is any scenario where China could actually withdraw or even slightly withdraw support for Russia, and what would have to happen for that to take place?
Definitely. I think the Chinese approach, current approach, is to regain the confidence in the European world. So therefore, there is a little subtle, laid-back approach from the Chinese when it comes to building that chemistry with Russia and providing all blanket support to the Russian game plan on war against Ukraine. And I definitely, I believe the Chinese leadership are rethinking about their whole approach on the Ukraine war. But we know for a fact that I think there is a greater scenario of Eurasian politics to Northeast Asian politics, which actually interests the Chinese more, because the China's eventual competition and rivalry is with the United States of America. So therefore, China is looking at the future. So China's future security threat and security rivalry is the United States of America, where it faces much stronger challenges in Northeast Asia to East Asia. So therefore, the Chinese would be requiring Russian support in the Eurasian and in the Northeast Asian regions. So therefore, they would not really cut off completely their chemistry with Russia. So there is a continuation in the Chinese-Russian chemistry will continue to evolve, and we should not really be forgetful about that fact. But again, the Chinese are reassessing their approach, whole approach to supporting blankly to the Russia to President Putin and Russia's war scenarios against Ukraine.
Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? The sort of a dance, a very subtle dance that China is dancing.
And on that dance, like you said, it's really interesting because I think for many years it's exactly this, right? Europe between China and the United States, with the Americans trying to pull more Europeans to their side, and Europe not really deciding fully on either one. Just also worth noting, I think it's in Hungary that has, I think, the largest Huawei hub in terms of technology hub outside of China. So it also gives you, I think, and that's a security concern. The Americans are not happy about that at all. So I think also another complicated layer here. So where the dance will continue, we'll have to see. But look, fascinating insights. Thank you so much for that, Professor. Really appreciate you coming here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.